And I would like to play Ce Soir en Tunis, a night in Tunisia.
This special episode of Shaun Spins is brought to you by Mark over at Mad for Vinyl, a great place on YouTube.
Welcome to Shaun Spins. This is episode 51, and I'm your host, Shaun, and I hope everybody's safe and well. What do we got going on today? Oh, look out.
It's the third annual Shaun Spins Holiday Spectacular event.
Well, nothing says the holidays like Mudhoney. Today we're going to be reviewing the 35th anniversary of Superfuzz Bigmuff. The producer looks really mad. Let's get started. Here's the album for episode 51. This is the 35th anniversary of Mudhoney's Superfuzz Bigmuff. Came on this orange vinyl. Before we talk about the record and the show recently I was at, I just wanted to rewind a little bit to talk about my love for Mudhoney. I was originally introduced to Mudhoney when I was in middle school. A friend of mine made a mixtape, and they were a big part of the mixtape for me. Them and Husker Du, and it just was amazing. And I could never really find Mudhoney material growing up. One of the first pieces of Mudhoney material I found was, I think my father got me this. This is Sub Pop 200. Which also, I feel, has one of the best Nirvana songs on it, Spank Through. Yet Mudhoney's on this, and so is Green River. Another very early piece that I was able to get from Mudhoney is this CD from the Charles Peterson book. It was a photography book, I think it was Screaming Life. Sadly, the book has been stolen from me years and years ago, yet I still have the CD. Now, the cool thing about the CD, it's a mix of bands. And like when this came out, there was no such thing as making a mix CD. Like we would make mixtapes. So I thought it was really cool. And another cool thing about it is it's one track. You cannot skip between tracks. Starts off with a great Green River song, Ain't Nothing to Do. Goes into Mudhoney, Nirvana, Tad, Soundgarden, Screaming Trees, Beat Happening, Seaweed, and the Fastbacks. Just an amazing CD. I was just listening to it last night. That's how much I just love that. Yeah, like I was saying, it was really, really hard to find solo Mudhoney stuff. Shortly after I found those CDs in the early to mid-90s, I was able to get a copy of Superfuzz Bigmuff on CD. And then years and years later, I picked up the deluxe version when it came out. And I remember, like, I was getting confused also by the difference between the CD and the record. Even the older CD I had that doesn't have the deluxe concert stuff, it has all the early singles on it too. This has that plus a live concert, which is amazing. I actually gave away my copy of the my original CD to someone I was living with at that time. Got a few other CDs here, and then I'll get into the vinyls and other things. We're going to need a bigger table here. Here's the CD single for Let It Slide. This is My Brother the Cow. I changed the cover on it. I picked this up used many years ago for $2.99. Recently, I've been listening to that CD again. A friend of mine at a record store was talking about it, and I was like, yeah, it's good. This is Mudhoney's Tomorrow Hit Today. This is Mudhoney Piece of Cake. I remember getting this really cheap too. This is probably by far one of my favorite Mudhoney records. Just self-titled Mudhoney. This is right after Superfuzz Bigmuff, and a lot of the mixtape I had from my friend, the stuff came from this. Some singles from that same first release on just Mudhoney. This is the single for This Gift. Here's the single for Let It Slide. Here's Mudhoney's Touch Me I'm Sick and Sweet Young Thing Ain't Sweet No More. It's the Mudhoney single for You Got It. Here's the Mudhoney single for You Stupid Asshole. Let's go to the 12-inch records. Here's the 12-inch. Here's the Mudhoney Digital Garbage. I didn't really get into that album. I have to go back to it. Russ Shaw was talking about it to me recently, and I have to go back to listen to that again. This is Mudhoney Tomorrow Hit Today. I really like that one. This is Mudhoney's Every Good Boy Deserves Fudge. Every time I hear that title, it reminds me of tuning our instruments in school. This is Mudhoney's Vanishing Point. A couple live ones. This is Mudhoney on Top of the Space Needle, which is a great live album. This is live at Third Man, Mudhoney. I like this album so much. I got two of them, just in case I wear out one. A couple other releases from the band. We got the I'm Now DVD documentary on the band, which I think is a great documentary, but might be nominated as the worst graphic design cover ever. Here's recently Mud Ride, Steve's book. I was able to get a copy signed. That was great. Here's the band Monkey Wrench, which is part of Mudhoney. Here's a Monkey Wrench cassette. Let's get some other Mudhoney material. Here we go. This is the Sonic Youth Mudhoney 12-inch. Here's the 7-inch. Back to Monkey Wrench. You know, they were on the Germs tribute. And here's the 7-inch with them part of that. Two more things in the Mudhoney collection here. Here's the Freewheelin' Mark Arm and the Throw-Ups. You know, I just love Mudhoney. Just love them. Mudhoney came about after the separation of Green River, part of the band going towards Mother Love Bone and then Pearl Jam eventually. And then you have Mudhoney. And as I said, I love Mudhoney. A big part of me as a guitar player, comes from Mark and Steve from Mudhoney. So Mudhoney started off with Mark on vocals and other instruments and guitar, Steve on guitar, Dan on drums, and Matt on bass. And, growing up, I also knew of Dan being in Nirvana. Later on, when Matt left, Guy joined the band. Another big part of me, loving Mudhoney so much, were those photographs from Charles Peterson that were used in Sub Pop. And Charles Peterson meant the world to me growing up in the world of art and how to, learning how to express myself with the camera and what a camera can do other than just portrait photography, such as was at Kmart and Sears. So let's go back to Superfuzz Bigmuff. Now, so the EP only has 6 songs, and as I said, Russ Shaw talked about this too. I've gotten so accustomed to the CD in my life, sometimes I forget that. Similar to Jimi Hendrix, that, the early stuff was singles, different than Are You Experience. So you have the classic Charles Peterson photograph. There's Matt and Dan on the back, and Steve and Mark on the cover. Not only is the photography amazing, but documenting what was going on. Completely different than what was going on in the world of music in the late 80s. Even the guitars that are being played. In particular, the Fender Mustang. Nowadays Fender Mustangs are everywhere, and you can buy a brand new Fender Mustang. Not then. Fender Mustangs, Jaguars, Jazzmasters, Fender Broncos, Music Masters. These were all extremely cheap guitars that were used by, we'll say, underground bands. The big bands were these heavy metal bands and whatnot were using guitars like Ibanez's and stuff. Another thing that's fascinating is, with the title, Superfuzz Bigmuff, using these guitar pedals, not using these rack-mounted guitar pedal effects things that were very popular in the 80s. The sound of this album, this Jack Eldino, again, producing a lot of the stuff for Sub Pop, it's amazing. Just amazing. Nowadays, this is considered an extremely vintage guitar, and I think in Steve's book it talked about when he got it. Kurt Cobain playing them, everybody was playing these. Tad was playing, a Jazzmaster and things like that. It's amazing. So with the title, that Superfuzz Bigmuff, and the Superfuzz pedal in the Bigmuff pedal is actually used on the vinyl. The Univox Superfuzz on side A, and the Electro Harmonix Bigmuff on the other side. And I relate to the story that Steve tells, and I've heard him tell the story a couple times, that how he found his original Bigmuff pedal. That he was working at a restaurant, and he couldn't get a particular sound and was trying to figure out, and the person was like, oh, here, try this. And I believe he originally got a Superfuzz, which is an extremely rare pedal now and super expensive. Yet I imagine back then it was probably super cheap. I remember as a child, when I was first exposed to guitar pedals, there was a vintage guitar shop that just had a box of old guitar pedals. I remember seeing an old Gibson fuzz pedal just thrown in a box. Yet, finding that distortion pedal, changed the band. And eventually, Mark uses one pedal, the Superfuzz, and Steve uses the Electro Harmonix Bigmuff. And these guitar pedals, what they do is they completely change the sound of the guitar, be it distortion or fuzz. So I relate to the story that Steve tells about getting the pedal, because I had a similar experience. My first guitar and amp I had in the early 90s, it had a little distortion button on the amp, this little Fender Bronco amp I had. Yet I was at a store one time, and the gentleman working there says, have you ever tried one of these? And he held up this particular guitar pedal, and it was used at the time, maybe 6 months to a year old. I think I might have paid $25 or $30 for this DoD grunge in the early 90s. And within the first day, I destroyed my guitar amplifier. Like, the speaker got all messed up and we had to take it apart and put padding in it. It's funny now, even this guitar pedal has gone up in value. For the longest time, it wasn't. It's a very abrasive guitar pedal sound. And eventually, at another store where I got my first two guitars, the gentleman showed me a Bigmuff pedal. And at that time, they were made of like tank parts. And it just was amazing to add that, to add those stomp boxes. And at this time, you have to remember, like, there was no internet, so we couldn't go online and see what certain people were using as guitar pedals. Like I said, I had no idea what they were, similar to Steve Turner. The only guitar pedal I remember, like, kind of knowing growing up was that Jimi Hendrix used a fuzz face. Let's go mess with the guitar and play some of the different pedals so one can hear the difference between, like, distortion, overdrive, and fuzz, which is really used on Superfuzz Bigmuff.
The Star Wars Holiday Special will continue in a moment.
So here's what we're working with. We got a Boss Blues Driver Overdrive, a Boss DS2 Distortion, a newer Electro-Harmonix Bigmuff. There is a Dutch kazoo plugged in, yet all my pedals are having issues because the cords are kind of old, so it wasn't sounding too good. I did not plug in my older Bigmuff that I got in the 90s. My Superfuzz clone was also having issues. I think it just might be something just like with dust. I apologize about the sound. It's just coming through the air into the phone and the cords are not working too great. So here's the guitar out of tune normally. Here's with the blues driver. So that's overdrive, distortion, DS2. Bigmuff. You can hear that. You can hear the fluctuating in the chord. A little bit of the Dutch kazoo. Back to nothing. Well, I guess we were spreading some holiday cheer with some distortion and fuzz boxes. I hope we didn't wake the neighbors. It's a great EP. 6 songs is great. Sometimes it gets a little slow, then it speeds up. It's wonderful. My favorite's probably side B or Bigmuff. The last 2 tracks. It goes from If I Think and right into In and Out of Grace. It's got that little blurb in the beginning too, I think from Animal House, the movie, but what a way to end an album with those two songs, If I Think and In and Out of Grace. It's just got this great sound to the album. It's wonderful. I'll talk a little bit about the recent Mudhoney show I was at. First of all, it was great. Second of all, I debated about going to the show for at least a year because it was on a work night, and one of the things that really made me go is I had heard that Guy, the bass player, was moving back to Australia, and I thought this might be the last time I can go to a Mudhoney show. So when I got there, I was kind of like on the side of the stage. I had my earplugs in, and I like to be near the guitars and the guitar amps. I like to hear that more because, I'm a guitar player. And I noticed at one point, I'm next to the guitars and everything. I noticed at one point, like, half of Mudhoney was standing next to me. And really nobody else. Like, everybody else was on, like, the front of the stage or, like, further back. So when the opening act ended, I leaned over to Dan Peters because I was, like, shocked that I was standing next to Dan Peters. And I thanked him for coming, and I had mentioned to him that I thought about not coming, and I was telling him what I do for a living, and I was like, yeah, I'm kind of tired, and he was saying, like, the same thing to me, like, he's tired too, and I said, yeah, at least I don't have to go up on stage now and play for, like, an hour and a half, 2 hours. Yet, I'll tell you, he talked to me for at least 25 to 30 minutes, and, he put his arm around me, and he's, like, talking to me, and he was just super, super nice, funny, caring. He was talking to me about my job and thanking me for what I do. And it was just a super nice conversation. And it meant the world to me because I was very stressed out about work, and it meant a lot to me that, like, he cared about, like, talking about that. It was really interesting. I don't think we talked about music much. We talked about a little bit about, like, what he's touring with, the equipment, and what might be happening with the band in the future. Another thing I told him was a friend of mine at work said, if you get to meet anybody in the band, tell them the story about your first job, like, out of college, when you got in trouble with listening to Mudhoney. So one of my first jobs after college, I'm pulling up into the lot with that mixtape that my friend made me in the 8th grade. So I'm listening to Mudhoney, extremely loud. And the security guard runs out and yells, like, you can't park here. And I was like, no, I work here. And the security guard was like, you work here? Yeah. So Dan enjoyed that story. And so he goes up eventually to play. And when he came back out for the encore, he was like waving at me too. It was just super nice. Super nice. I always knew Mudhoney was a great band. Yet seeing Dan Peters live, I realized how much of an amazing drummer he is. Like, he is incredible. And not just an incredible drummer, but just an incredibly nice and funny person. And I realized at that point why anyone would want to be in a band with him, including, like, when he was in Nirvana. So I ended up with this really amazing souvenir. At one point during the night, I helped the guitar tech find something, and early in the show, Dan broke a drumstick, like, almost immediately, like, during, like, the second song. And it was sitting on the stage, and I asked the guitar tech if he could hand it to me, and sure enough, at the end of the show, like, I got one of Dan Peters', like, the only drumstick he broke that night. And, a lot of people were picking up different souvenirs of t-shirts and records, yet to me, that had to be the best souvenir I could get. Just reminded me of that conversation I had with Dan, and it really meant the world to me because I was really extremely stressed out from work, and he was just such a caring person and funny. So, just a great show. So again, this album, Superfuzz Bigmuff, It's a great album. I recommend it. I recommend Mudhoney. All of Mudhoney. It's a great band. I also recommend, if you don't play a musical instrument, you might want to, start playing guitar or something, make music. It's a beautiful thing. So that's about it for our third annual Holiday Spectacular. Producer still looks mad. Sorry. I don't know what the producer was expecting for episode 51, but yet I enjoyed myself, and I hope you did too. So, if you're celebrating, happy holidays to you, whatever you're celebrating. And until next time, I hope everybody's safe and well, and be nice to each other, and take care.